Good afternoon, LEC community. Thank you so much for being with us for another episode of Ask an Educator. My name is Susana Elisa Radas, and I am the Deputy Director of the Latinx Education Collaborative, working to increase Latino representation in K through 12 classrooms. Ask an Educator is a live stream show that was born at the beginning of COVID to kind of give us an opportunity to showcase the stories of Latino educators around the country doing amazing things. And so today, I have the pleasure of having Josué Covarrubias with us. Josué, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. It's Thursday, almost Friday. Friday
That's
Eve.
right. That's right.
Always,
It's a little
always
it's a
my
little rainy today, but spring is coming, so that's a good thing.
okay, okay. Yeah, yes. It's not raining today in Kansas City. So here in a second, everyone will hear where you're from. Before we get started, we got some friends with us already. Hello, Carlos. How are you? Thanks for being with us today and showing support. So without further ado, Josue, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Yeah. First of all, super excited to be a part of this today. I've been looking forward to this since back like 2 months ago when we talked about it. Just want to get the opportunity to interact with people. I know through the pandemic we haven't had as much of a chance to go to conferences or go to events, and so a lot of it has been virtual, which is still great. But that opportunity to be able to talk to other people and find out what other folks are doing from across the country is great. So I am Josué Covarrubias, and I am a middle school principal in Grand Island, Nebraska. And this is my fourth year here in Grand Island, Nebraska. I am originally, I say originally because I grew up in South Sioux City, Nebraska, which is in northeast Nebraska, right on the corner of Iowa and South Dakota border. But is not I'm not originally from there, I should say, because I was born in Hidalgo, Mexico, and lived there for just a little over 7 years before my parents, as many immigrant parents, get the opportunity to head to El Norte for job opportunities and chasing that American dream. And so my parents brought my brother and sister and I to South Sioux City when I was about 7 years old. Grew up there, had the blessing that I was able to, go to college and continue my education at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, where I was able to kind of figure out that education was something that I was really passionate about, and was able to, major and get a degree in education, and then return to that hometown in Nebraska to be able to teach. Eventually pursue my master's degree in administration, where it led me into this role that I am in now, and I've been here for 4 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know obviously this isn't part of the planned questions, but I kind of wonder what brought your family from Hidalgo to Sioux City, Nebraska, of kind of
Yeah,
all places, right?
I know, right? I used to ask my parents that question all the time, especially in the wintertime when it was negative 20-degree wind chill. Like, why didn't we stop in Texas on the way? But
Yeah.
as with anything, work was the biggest thing. My father was always kind of a migrant worker
Mhm.
from the time he was about 16 years old. Both legally and illegally through that journey. And in the 80s was able to gain residency through the Reagan Amnesty Act, and then shortly after that, as myself and each one of my siblings were born, applied for all of us in our family to get residency, and so we were able to eventually move to the U.S. With that documentation, and why Sioux City or South Sioux City, Nebraska, was that there was a meatpacking plant there that is now Tyson Foods plant. At the time was an Iowa beef products plant, beef beef production, and my father kind of had, through some family and friends, had learned about this job, had taken this job in production in this meat processing plant, and had been there a while, and kind of thought. It's difficult for me to be in this job because it's not a migrant job and to be away from my family. And so decided
Mm.
it was time for us all to be here together. And then he, to this day, still works in a meatpacking plant, and has worked his life, just providing for his family, but that difficult work that many of our parents go through, I was able to kind of see firsthand, and all that sacrifice that they were able to, both my mother and father, as they worked, in the plants. But yeah, that's what brought us to Nebraska, and then kept us here as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that story is it resonates with a lot of people. I know a lot of people I've interviewed, Dodge City, Kansas and Garden City, Kansas, kind of the places you don't hear about often, end up being either the meat packing plants or other kind of factory work. So thank you for sharing that. Ivan Ramirez, who's our director of digital experiences with us. Hi, Ivan. Ivan says, your students are so lucky to have you. We need more Latinx administrators. Absolutely. I mean, any response to that, Josué?
First of all, hola Ivan. I
Yes, you
had the
guys know each
privilege
other.
of meeting Ivan a while back at a national event that I was at. Obviously, thank you, for that comment. I agree. I think we need more Latinx teachers, administrators, board members, or just involved parents, because representation definitely matters. But also, our kids need to see us in order to see themselves in these positions.
I love that you mentioned parents in there too, because a lot of times either parents aren't empowered or welcome maybe in some schools, or maybe they just need the affirmation, the welcome, right, the invitation to be a part of our schools. Thank you for including that. So to kind of jump into your story, you told us a little bit already, but is tell us a little bit about your leadership story. So maybe your upbringing, your journey as a student or a professional. What do you kind of credit for where you are today?
Sure. I mean, man, a lot of people, I think, is what I credit. Um, I think that I am a product of everybody that I've known, and I say that often. Like my identity is so steeped in the people that I knew growing up, the people that invested time and energy to help me along the way, which I think then played a major role in my decision to come back and be an educator. There's educators in my family. It's kind of a family affair. I have some aunts and uncles who in Mexico were teachers and administrators, and so I think there was already kind of a route in that direction. But growing up, I thought other things. I thought maybe I'll be an attorney someday, or maybe I really was into like child psychology for a while, and thought when I went to college, like I'm going to go into psychology. But I will tell you this, that along that route, through elementary, middle school, and high school, is there were just so many positive, supporting educators. And I say educators because there was teachers, but there was also principals. There was, support, community liaison, people that like made such an impact on me. Sometimes just that belief that somebody can do something, that reminder of like, hey, you're important, you can do good things if you just keep it up. I think it goes a long way with kids, even when we don't realize it in that moment. But all that encouragement, and then that opportunity once I got to high school to have some folks help me realize and understand what that process of getting accepted and going to college looked like. My parents had a middle school education, but what I always appreciated is that they only had a middle school education because that's all they were provided. That's all the opportunity that they had. And through my childhood and adolescence, education was so important in our household. I mean, they didn't know necessarily what it looked like. They didn't know necessarily what that support needed to look like. But they were there to ensure that it was important to me, that it was important in our family, and that they helped me maybe just navigate like, who should I go talk to? Just the encouragement of, we want you to go to college. Go talk to somebody about this. We can't help you, but we will help you in any way we can, and look for and seek out those people and who those folks will be. And so that really was important for me, because I was able to, then maybe look for other mentorships with other people in the community. My guidance counselor in high school became, the person that I probably spent the most time with when I was in high school, just applying for scholarships and learning about different schools and all of that. And then when I did get to college, looking for those mentorships there as well. So when I was at the University of Nebraska, seeking out those student groups, seeking out those staff members that were there. I'm sure they're not on right now, but I always like to shout them out. People in college that were super influential to me. Thinking back to like Dr. Bill Waters, Camila Ramirez, who were those staff members that were just there to just encourage and just say, keep going, keep doing it. It's going to get hard. Keep doing it. Keep going. Seeking out those student organizations, Mexican American Student Organization, my fraternity that I was a part of, Sigma Lambda Beta, we're a multicultural fraternity. Hey.
Josué, we're siblings.
Come on now.
I'm a Gamma.
Well, I should have known that. Hey. All right.
Oh my God. I was literally going to ask.
Yes.
Do you know the Gammas at UNL? Because I'm a Gamma.
That's right. Yeah. So, all of those folks, to me,
gosh, yeah.
I am a representation of all of those people and everything that they invested in me. And so, that's so important to me, because as I've gone back to kind of continue and try to mentor other people, like thinking about like, how did they help me? What are the things that they did for me? And just trying to keep that going. So got into education. And then while I was in education, people continued just encouraging me, saying like, you could do more. You can do more than this. Go get your master's. You could do more. And so I kind of caved and gave in. And it was such a good thing that I did, because I was able to then find school administration where I can have that bigger impact beyond just the kids that are inside of my classroom. I can impact an entire building and then bigger at the district level if possible. So yeah, all of those folks, that's what led me to where I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. You got some brothers in the comments, I think.
Hey, there he is.
I love it, Josué. That is so funny that we're siblings, and for you to mention SLB and then like for us to be siblings, that's really, really funny. For those of you who don't know Greek life, I'm Sigma Lambda Gamma, and my line, we founded the Gamma chapter at UMKC here in Kansas City. And so absolutely that resonates with me, is finding those groups of people that have similar stories and kind of attaching to each other, so that you're kind of all swimming upstream together instead of swimming upstream alone.
Absolutely.
And so absolutely. I love how you said, you are, I think you said something like you're a product of all of the people who have supported you. And that's awesome to be able to credit all of these people and your parents to say, I can't imagine as a parent, right, how much it takes for me to say, I don't know how to do that. Go find someone who does, or let me help you find someone who does. I often talk about my mom and how she would have burritos for me every morning when I was in college. And just, that was just as helpful as my college advisor, right? Because I needed those burritos to keep me going. And that was what she could offer at the time, right? We have some of maybe one of your teachers in the comments.
Kamea was the Oasis coordinator. I don't know if that's the right word.
I love it.
One of my mentors in college. Kamea can speak to the power of those parents as well, even at college, because I remember those days at the Mexican American Students Association, where we got those moms to come in and help make those tamales for that big tamale sale. That was our fundraiser to send kids to different conferences. Parents are so critical in that as well, right? Shout out Kamea and Stephen Reyes, who is my founder at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, first beta to cross in the state of Nebraska.
I love that. I love it. You said Stephen?
Stefan.
I'm sorry. Stefan, hello, brother. Nice to meet you. It's so funny. And you talked about like the virtual space. And though it's been a big struggle, it's also really cool to connect with other people. And we actually were up at UNL not that long ago and visiting Gammas there. And so, hey, little side thing that we have in common. Of course, you kind of put it into your story already, but talk to us about some of the hurdles that you had, in maybe getting your master's and getting to where you are now.
Yeah. My story isn't unique to that immigrant plight of that big hurdle often is nobody's done it before you, you know, in your family. And they often look to you to be the first. Um, and so that I think that's that first hurdle that we have to help our kids now overcome is that belief that they can. Because once you believe, you'll figure it out. Once you know that there's a path for you, there's a goal for you, there's a vision for you, you find a way to make that happen. You find the people that help you make that happen. But until that point, there's not much that anybody can do. It's not until we get to that level. And so, you know, often the things that we do in schools are so critical to helping kids in that next step. You know, whether it's we teach math and we have to make sure that they're prepared for that next grade level of math that's eventually going to get them there. But there's that underneath layer of, along with teaching them that math content, we have to help them learn to believe in themselves. And so for me, that was, you know, that was probably that big hurdle. Is once I knew that I had a plan for me, I found the way to get there. And that's not to say that it wasn't difficult, obviously. And again, I credit a lot of people because I didn't do it on my own. There was a lot of people who were there to help guide me, to give me advice, to show me the things that I needed to do to apply for scholarships, to apply for the ACT, to once I got into college, to declare a major, to get involved in different groups, you know, that could help expand my leadership ability. But I think those hurdles, once you know the path and start finding the people that are on that same path with you, become less of obstacles and more of like goals that you then want to attain.
Mm-hmm.
The groups that I was involved in college were so crucial to helping me not just find a family while I was there, but also like see other people being successful at those things. Seeing those that have been there before me and hearing their path along the way and going, hey, I can do that too. That helped decrease some of those obstacles, and it helped make it more attainable. You know, you always run into things that you weren't expecting. But when you have to go at it on your own, it's much harder than when you go, you know, this is the first time that I've ever gotten a bad grade in a class. Who can I talk to about this? And somebody else can be there to pick you up and go, I remember that bad grade that I got that freshman year as well. This is what I did about it. And then you can just kind of go with it and kind of follow that path that others are following, because somebody's then looking up to you eventually as well. And so some of those obstacles were just the belief, and then finding the people that could help you. Once I got into, you know, education, obviously there were new barriers, right, that I had never encountered either. Maybe like a belief of who you are as an educator, because you stand out, you're different from everyone else. You know, when I was hired as a Spanish teacher, which immediately becomes, you know, kind of like the Hispanic guy in the Spanish teaching position, you kind of get pigeonholed into like, this is your niche. And so when you want to expand on that, like it's breaking down that barrier of, yes, I can, give me an opportunity, and I will show you that it's more than this. Or just, you know, the belief that you can do something else beyond that, right? Because like, I should be happy that I'm here. Like that often is something that I think goes through people's minds. I'm a big believer that good is the enemy of great. Because if you're good, you get comfortable. And it's hard to then push yourself, you know, to that next level, because what if I fail? What if I can't? Or I should just be happy that I've gotten this far. But I think we have to, you know, find those things that still bring us joy, and like we find passion in, because otherwise we get complacent and then we stop growing. It's important that we're always looking for that next thing that you can challenge yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the people who you looked up to and things like that. And anytime something like that is mentioned, I think about just why our mission, right? And why representation matters. It matters for us to see ourselves in a variety of places, in schools, in finance, in medicine, right? For students you said, you know, for it to even be a goal, and your first goal to like to go to college, to graduate high school, to that, seeing those examples. Maybe you will be the first in your neighborhood and your family, and right, but then, getting in the know with other people who have been in similar situations. I'm sure some of your brothers were first generation college goers too. Some of the people in the Mexican American Student Association, getting with those people who are also kind of, I remember with my sisters, it was like barely above water, right? Sometimes. And of course, that's the college experience for a lot of people. But when you're also maybe financially supporting your family, or, you're translating documents for your family, right? And then you have people who have that similar situation, you're like, you're making it, I'm making it, we got this, right? It often makes a difference.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
students to have teachers, right, and administrators, and you even talked about, we are purposeful in using the term educators versus teachers, increasing Latinx educators in schools, because you're right? Even the lunch person, the secretary, the nurse, the janitor, right? To say, hey, usted sabe español, right? You have kiddos who
Mhm.
will kind of gravitate to the people who have similar backgrounds as them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that we underestimate, even in schools. We underestimate the power of those adults that are in our building. In that, our kids look up to not just the principal, not just the teacher.
Hmm.
We all work at that school, and our parents as well. Like in those partnerships that we have with school, our kids internalize that, even when it's not like conscious and noticeable.
Hmm.
That's binding in their brain. Like these are people that are committed to their career, to their job, to their community, and they made it. Why can't I make it as well? Even if it's the secretary, even if it's the food service person, the librarian, whatever that might be. But it's how do we ensure that kids are seeing us in a way that allows them to see themselves, in those similar situations, and not just because we want all of them to be educators, but seeing them in that professional environment, and having them see themselves in that as well.
Yeah, well, we're one of the first professionals that they see in their lives, right? So kindergarten is the first. Their kindergarten teachers are often the first professionals they're with on a day in day out basis, right? And
Mhm.
so even if education isn't the route they take, seeing someone that looks like them as a professional, and oftentimes what I found out too is that oftentimes our secretaries and food service people who maybe aren't certified to teach either were teachers in other places,
Mhm.
or they just love children and students and they aspire to teach. And so they have a certain nuance about them where
Mhm.
to go to that secretary who's going to give you a lollipop out of her drawer because
Mhm.
she loves kids too, right?
Mhm.
So absolutely appreciating all of the people in schools. And through all of those hurdles, and you talked about the hurdles of college and even becoming a teacher. I know what it felt like to feel othered, right? And be the other, despite having all the same certifications or degrees or whatever. It still is a different experience. What keeps you going through all of that? And now as an administrator, it has its own whole new set of hurdles. What keeps you going through all of that?
Yeah, great question. I think it's remembering why you began, but also like seeing in the faces of the kids that you see on a day-to-day basis, um, who they represent as well. I actually just had a conversation about this with some other people in my school. Um, Even though I had struggles and had hurdles that I had to overcome, I was so lucky that my parents made the difficult decision to come to this country. I had my closest friend growing up, my first cousin, in Mexico, just as smart as I was as a kid, maybe a harder worker. I was a little lazier than him. I left. He became a phenomenal student in Mexico. But even through that, like his his level of what he could achieve was here just because he didn't have the fortune of his parents bringing him to this country. And so I sit sometimes and think about like our kids that are here, they're so fortunate because of, the opportunity that they were given, but also like within that setting, like there's other kids that are even more fortunate because of other things that have happened for them. So how do we continue to like raise the floor of what the expectation is for our kids and how we prepare them for that next level? And then trying to remember like why we do this work, right? Because I do think and definitely like in administration, it's so easy to focus on like systems that work, but then it becomes about the system and not about the kids that are benefiting from that system. So trying to continue to put that in perspective that like on a day-to-day basis, the only reason why we exist as a school is for each and every one of those kids. And reminding kids of that as well. I mean, when kids come into my office, whether it's for something good or something that they got in trouble for, I try to often remind them like, hey, without you, this place doesn't exist. You're not here for me. I'm here for you. And with that, like having kids understand that like they're just not only just as important in the process of helping them be successful, but like we are here to support them. Every single in this building has a job because they need us, not the other way around. Just continuing to remember that and then focusing on those successes too, because it's easy sometimes in this job, especially as an administrator, more so than I remember when I was a teacher, to see the negative and see like the failures that occur. And I use that word failures, but really what I'm talking about is like when things go wrong, when situations come up that like make it so that a student can't be as successful, when situations come up out of their control that make it so that like we can't do anything to help them and we're so like handcuffed, hampered by that. But those places where we have successes, celebrating those situations, because they're happening every day. And if we only focus on the negative or just on like growth that we need to still make, we forget to celebrate the things that are bringing us back every day. And it's just important that we keep that, that perspective and that we remind the kids what their purpose is as well. I have a sign in my office that, I often have kids read before they leave. And I feel like this sign is more for me, but it's there for kids, and I make them read it out loud to themselves before they leave my office, excuse me. The sign says, "You are the person your family has been waiting generations for." Well, I'm getting kind of choked up, sorry. You will change this future forever. It's hard because no one has done it in your family before. They've been waiting for someone to make the path. Don't quit. Fight for your future and your family's future. And like, if we don't take that perspective, if we don't remind ourselves that it's for them and help them remember that, we lose sight of the goal, we lose sight of the purpose, we lose sight of the vision. And then we just become another institution. We don't become a dream factory, which is what we're supposed to be.
You said so much that resonates with me. I mean, I think we have similar backgrounds and stories, right? And that's absolutely why. But our students also do too, right? And again, going back to why representation matters, because for a lot of our families, like perhaps yours and perhaps mine, it was like a life or death situation. Like we did have to make it. It needed to happen because, especially for an immigration story, right? It's like you risked it all, literally, right? You left your language, you left your culture, you left your family to come to a new country. And like this is do or die kind of situation, right? And for a lot of our students, regardless if they're immigrants or not, that's their story as well. And so hearing that from you, from an administrator, from a teacher, like often to say like even if the next step is home ownership, right, and or even if the next for your family, right, and that's building generational wealth and that's building freedom for a lot of people, right. My mom often, she gets down about kind of like where they ended up in life, and and the lack of opportunity, honestly, like you said earlier, that they got. And I tell her, like, the fact that you came here and established, you all own a home and you all own cars and you all have jobs and you have a little bit of a savings, like that's miles and bounds to what, can you hear me now? Oh, you can't hear me at all?
I can't hear you. Sorry, the second half of that cut out. Can
Can
you
you
hear
hear me
me
now?
okay?
Hmm. I can
I'm
hear you.
sorry, I
Can you hear
can't hear
me?
you.
No? Okay, hold on. Can you hear me now? No? No? Hello? There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, I was saying, I don't know what's the last thing you heard, but I was saying, how just every next step is a next step for a family, for generational wealth and for generational, maybe not wealth either, right? But generational progress.
Mhm.
And that being for some families, high school diplomas, for some families being, like I said, home ownership, for some families being attaining a college degree and a master's degree. And so being that example for your students is like just so amazing. I know when you and I met, kind of a side note, when you and I met, we talked about there being a Latino demographic in Nebraska that a lot of people kind of don't realize, right? So tell me a little bit about that, just to kind of get everybody informed on that.
Yeah, I think when you think of Nebraska, you think of certain things, right? Like cornfields and cows and like plains. And not that people are wrong, because I think there still is quite a bit of that in Nebraska, but there's this like rich culture and diversity in so many places inside the state. And it goes back to that, why are they here? It's those opportunities for work are here.
Mm.
And so, you think of cities in Nebraska, obviously, Omaha, Lincoln are those big cities, but there's these pockets in different locations throughout Nebraska. Grand Island is one of them, South Sioux City, Nebraska, Lexington, Nebraska, Scottsbluff and Gearing, Nebraska, that are just teeming with diversity because there's job opportunities there that immigrants are happy to fill. And so it creates diversity in the workforce, but also those families stay and they have kids, and those kids come through the school system, and it changes communities. I think about my community in South Sioux City where I grew up. And when my family got there in 1993, there wasn't as many of us, right? We were some of the first families that came into the community. I was one of like 5 EL kids in the entire school, and our EL classroom was the broom closet next to the food service, cafeteria. And then as I grew up, through that community, that diversity increased, tenfold. I think in 20 years, there was a 300% Latinx growth in that community. And that's the same in so many other communities in Nebraska because of those opportunities. And then what that then creates is families staying, children growing up and going through that school system as well. In that community in South Sioux City and both, as well as in Grand Island, our adult demographic is definitely predominantly Caucasian, and the school system is the opposite. In South Sioux City, right before we left to move to Grand Island, the Latinx demographic in the elementary schools was 80% of the kids in a community
Wow.
where Latin people, Hispanic people are still the minority. Well, I mean, you don't have to be a statistician to know that in 20 years that won't be the case anymore, and that's the same way in some of these other communities. And so why representation is so important is that these kids are coming through, and they're being educated one way or another by one group or another. It's nice to be able to have more people that again look like them are there and understand their story. And it doesn't just have to be other Latinx people also, though. It can be people that are Caucasian, but understand the perspective, understand the plight of, understand, where equity needs to be a driving force in the things that we do in those communities. So yeah, oddly enough, out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, we have these super rich, diverse communities because of that labor force.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that you talked a little bit about it to, help us as a society really get past that notion that we don't exist in the Midwest, or we don't exist in rural areas, right? So thank you for all of that. We have one of your friends, maybe Adam, with us.
Oh
He
yeah, yeah,
said,
yeah. It's one of my childhood friends.
I
When I
love
first came to
it.
this country, one of my first friends that I had in this country. Good guy.
I love that. He says you're an amazing person and leader. Well, I mean, based on the comments, you're amazing, and based on our conversation, that's I'm really just happy for your students that and proud to know that you are with your students every day. But to kind of wrap up our conversation, and like if you wanted them to know something when they walk out of your office or when they walk out of your school and they graduate, something that you want them to leave knowing, what would that be?
Um, so many things. I think one of the things that I think is most important is I always want kids to leave here feeling like um, they were important, they were cared for, and they had supporters, advocates, cheerleaders here, as well as people who are here preparing them for like the next content area or the next grade level. And so I always want to make sure that the things that we do, the action steps that we take as staff are steeped inside of what is our mission, what are we trying to accomplish, as a school, and half of that is academics, but half of that is making sure that kids believe in themselves and have relationships that matter. I think when we think back at all of our education as adults, the people that stand out are not the people that were great teachers, but it's the people that cared about us. It's the people that took the time. And so, yes, it's important that we're teaching kids, all the things that they need to be successful in these careers. But inside of that saying of kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, has to live every day in everything that we do. So my hope is always that kids leave feeling like that time that they had in middle school was important, that they felt cared for, that they felt loved, and that they'll always have people here supporting them through the rest of that journey that they have.
I I love that. I mean, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We're so steadfast and just committed to the scope and sequences and the curriculums and the instructional best practices, which honestly are all really important too. But until we build relationships with our students and they know that we care about them, um, the curriculum and the content will come after. Well, Josue, I very much, Stefan's with me. Great conversation with an even better man. I agree. Thank you so much, Josue. I know it's been a long teaching principal day, and so for you to take time to be with us this afternoon means a lot. Thank you for what you do and who you are for students. I appreciate your commitment to education, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Um, as always, I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm here to help anybody. So if anybody
Yeah.
needs anything, I'm happy to share that contact info. And I know you have it and are willing to share that out. So I'm here to help anybody else, or just chat, hey, I have a similar story, and I can learn from people as well, from those conversations as well. So thank you.
I love that. I love that. We hear all the time about how important mentorship is. And so you heard it, y'all. If Josue's story stood out to you and you're needing some supports, let me know and I'll get y'all connected. Josue, thank you so much. We'll talk soon. Okay, pues bye.